Welcome to Your Movie Rocks, an alternate ending podcast where all movies are great movies.
Even the bad ones?
Especially the bad ones. I'm your host, Mandy Albert, and my guest this month is a voice that you have heard and an acerbic wit that you have read several times on the site already. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you should go read the site some more. Welcome, Gavin McDowell. How you doing?
I'm fine. I'm very flattered. I didn't expect the flattery. Yes, I have been described as acerbic in the past. So yes, I write for the site. In addition to appearing occasionally on the podcast to complain about upcoming films. So as a voice, as a literal voice, not so relatively new, but yes, I've been writing for at least 2.5 years now. 3 years?
Yeah, seems like it's been a while. It's been a while at this point, and you just had a new column come out, right?
Right, it was on The Godfather Part 3.
I guess when this is released, it won't just have come out, but we are recording this on April 26th, many days before anybody will actually hear it. And at this time, the column has just been released.
Right, so it will have been... I will not have published anything new at this point. It's still The Godfather Part 3, which I read extensively about, and I had previously recorded a podcast on a different movie podcast about Inherit the Wind, and then I read a lot about this, and all those three things are kind of interrelated, and they're all mixed up in my head right now, especially the Inherit the Wind stuff, which I think is very apropos of the movie we're going to talk about.
I was going to say, that's that if you accidentally bring up Inherit the Wind stuff, there's a chance that it'll still apply to what we're talking about today.
Sure,
so if you have read Gavin's work, you know that he is our religion and religious movies guy. Which I'm sure contributed to the movie that he has assigned me today to love. So, Gavin, would you like to tell everybody a little bit about the movie we're going to be talking about and why you chose it for your Movie Rocks?
Right. So, the movie I chose is called Agora. It came out in 2009. It stars Rachel Weisz and a pre-fame Oscar Isaac. He had just played Hot Joseph by this point, maybe some other things. And is directed by, I believe, Alejandro Amenabar is his name. So one reason I chose it, it's a film about religion. It takes place in Alexandria in the 4th and 5th century. And I guess it makes it a peplum. It's very unusual for a peplum, but it is very interested in the religious melting pot of that city. And one reason I picked it, normally I would write about it for my column, but I made a mistake a long time ago in that I decided to let people pick what I write about for that column.
You fool.
Yeah, so I mean, I could just...
Who lets people pick the things they watch?
Well, the thing is, because I'm writing about esoteric subjects, I want to make sure at least one person is engaged with what I'm writing about. That was the thinking behind it. And no one has picked Agora, and I would have to interpose myself to do that, and I just didn't... I mean, I thought about it, but you made it easier for me, Mandy, so I could just talk about it here instead of writing about it. Because I definitely did want to write and discuss this film, which I find very interesting film, unusual film, in that it talks about a period of history you don't see in movies very often, and that would be late antiquity, which is this amorphous period roughly between 250 and 750. And if your film does not feature King Arthur, you're going to be hard-pressed to name a film that takes place really in this time period. I can only name a few others. I have like an ongoing letterbox list. And I stumbled upon this film in a very Gavin way. I was studying, I used to, like in college, I used to have, when you have these, what do you call it, when you get to know someone, icebreaker, like an icebreaking question.
Oh.
I would ask people, what would be the subject that you choose to adapt to a musical if you could? That was my icebreaker. Yes, and I had my answer ready. And my answer was always the Council of Ephesus, which was a religious council between Nestorius, the Patriarch of Constantinople, and Cyril of Alexandria, who is a character in the movie Agora. And so I discovered the movie Agora when I was thinking about my icebreaker question. I thought, has Cyril of Alexandria ever appeared in a movie before? And I see that and then I get a still from this movie, and I just I shit my pants. It's like, how is this possible? There's a new movie out, and it has Cyril of Alexandria, and I was like, what is it about? Of course, it's about Hypatia. I was like, oh fuck, Hypatia. No, there's not going to be any Nestorius in this movie.
And indeed, there is no Nestorius in this movie.
No mention of Nestorius.
I'm still sitting here trying to figure out how a musical about the Council of Ephesus would work, but at the same time, they did make 1776, which is just about a bunch of,
tip of my tongue.
American colonials sitting around arguing. So.
Tip of my tongue. I would have said 1776. If you can make a musical about that, you can make it about any church council.
It's true.
There's shouting back at each other about Christological controversies. But that's how I learned about the film. And then, almost as soon as it was announced or released, it was a controversial film when it came out. Controversial for people who knew about its existence.
I was going to say.
And Hypatia is always a controversial subject, so I guess I need to talk about who she is. Basically, she was a lady philosopher in Alexandria, a pagan, and she was basically lynched by a mob in particularly gruesome ways. They accosted her in the street, overturned her chariot, took her to a church, stripped her nude, and then tore her apart with potsherds, which I've read is a standard street combat weapon in the ancient world.
Not a nice way to go out.
But she is more, she's one of those people, I guess Jesus Christ himself is more famous for the way they died than the way they lived. And she is a symbol, more of a symbol than a human woman. I mean, she was a human woman, but we have 5 sources about her existence that vary from a couple lines to an entire paragraph. And letters from one of her students who is a character in the film. We'll get to him soon, which is probably the most information you'll find about her. Is just she's basically she has a weapon in the science versus religion debate. Or she's actually used in a surprisingly large number of contexts, right? So she represents science versus religion. She represents paganism versus Christianity. She represents women versus men, and all sorts of things. Carl Sagan brought her up in Cosmos. She comes up in some of the books.
My girl symbol's got layers.
Yeah, so when studying Inherit the Wind, she didn't come up in Inherit the Wind, but she came up in books about Inherit the Wind as part of the science versus religion debate.
Honestly, thinking about it, I'm a little surprised that maybe not, well, it would have had to be Inherit the Wind, but I'm kind of surprised she didn't show up in a Stanley Kramer movie like Inherit the Wind, because at least her symbol is ready-made for such a thing.
Right.
Though, we do have Agora, which...
Right, so
has some Stanley Kramer tendencies.
It definitely does. So, right, so when Agora comes out and bring Hypatia back into the limelight, and people overanalyzed, it was a little bit like when Last Temptation came out in 1989, except on a smaller scale, because how many people know who Hypatia is? But the people who did, they jumped on this film. Is this film historically accurate? Is it a diatribe against Christianity? Is it fair? Does it portray Hypatia accurately? All those types of things came into it. And it's kind of, for me, all those things are kind of vestigial, because I'm just really happy to see a depiction of Alexandria in the 4th century. So to answer your question, yeah, that's why I picked it.
Okay, so you actually do like this movie. You have assigned me a movie that you like.
I have, yes. I like this movie. I've seen it 3 times now, once by myself.
All right.
Once I invited a Byzantine friend and another friend who was a specialist of Caria and Asia Minor. So, other nerds like myself to watch it. And then this past Easter, I invited my sister-in-law and then another academic nerd to watch it with me, who specializes in Jewish studies. And the Jews come up in this film, as they ought to.
They sure do.
It's part of the story. Yeah, so yes,
That's a good reason for something to come up in a movie.
I do like this. I do like this movie. It's a solid 4 stars for me, and I thought I would like it. It's kind of grown on me since the first time I watched it, and then I was wondering if I would still like it as much. And I found the most recent viewing quite refreshing. But that's I will not waver. Yes, I do like this movie.
Okay, well, in my eagerness to talk about this movie and how much we love it, I forgot to give the explanation for how the show works. So I'm going to backtrack and do that now. So if you are joining us for the first time, for every show, my guest assigns me a movie to watch and we discuss the movie, just like the 10,000 other movie podcasts, except that there's a catch. No matter what, I am only allowed to say nice things about the movie. My guest can say whatever they want, but me, only nice things. And furthermore, only sincere nice things, not I loved it when the guy in the theater behind me started snoring. If I have nothing nice to say, I'm lying because every movie does something right. So, I loved this movie, and the first thing that I loved about this movie was actually the title sequence. Or not quite the title sequence, but like the pre-title sequence, when we are floating around in space and then the moon turns into the O in the word Agora. It's a nice tone setter. It's a little bit cheesy, and I don't tend to like, I'm losing the actual term for them right now, but like the context scrolls, the words on the screen, the Star Wars is. That is not a gimmick that I typically like, but it works okay here. And I appreciate that we kind of start very, very, very big out in space and then get smaller and then go actually into the Agora by means of the moon. It's a nice way to start off the film.
I agree with you, except that I don't like the text. Because first of all, it makes me think of Star Wars. And second of all, I guess I'm allowed to say nasty things about this film. Like, every time the text appears, it says something dumb. I don't think the very first, I cannot remember. Well,
so does every time the Star Wars text appears.
I guess I suppose so, but I don't know. Star Wars is a great, I guess it's not a mood setter on the same thing as Star Wars, but I do like that we get to see the, going into the circle, and then we hear Hypatia talking about how beautiful and perfect circles are. And I like the outro of the film is similar, except it's no longer, it's no longer a circle, it goes through an ellipse.
Yes.
She learns that she has had to revise her beliefs and in light of her own scientific discoveries, that sometimes ellipses are good too, and the world is not just circles.
We are firmly in spoiler territory, and one of the major spoilers is no. This is a spoiler zone podcast. One of the big spoilers is, oh man, guys, ellipses are good too. Right.
So I guess for those of, I presume people will go into a movie about Hypatia. Well, I guess you could go into this one by accident. But as I said before,
I was going to say, people didn't really go into a movie about Hypatia, is my understanding. Like, the nerds like you sought it out, but it did not make back its budget at the box office.
Yeah, well, okay, that's unsurprising, but considering the discourse that it kicked up, I suspect someone had to have seen it. But
sometimes controversy puts butts in seats, and sometimes controversy keeps them out, and in this case, it seems like it was the latter.
Right, so any case, she, as I said before, she's someone who's most famous for how she died. So if you come into this movie, just be prepared, because she dies. Not in the way I described earlier, surprisingly. They kind of...
No, it's much more romantic.
Yeah, they
sort of. Question mark.
Well, they fucked that one up. But anyway, to go back to the beginning, right? So she's discoursing on circles, and I suppose you liked other things besides the intro.
I did, yes. No, we go right from the intro into her class, where she's telling her class about how beautiful and perfect and wonderful circles are, and how they work in the Ptolemaic model of the, I guess not the solar system, but of the, because we didn't know it was the solar system at that point, but the universe with the Earth and the Sun and the Wanderers, which wander around the Earth unreliably for some strange reason that we cannot figure out.
It does bother me that they call them wanderers when, like, the Greek word for wander is literally planet. That's why we call them planets, because they're stars that move. And it's like the Ptolemaic conception is that, stars are like pinpricks in the sky, they don't move. But there are... Yes,
but it's less romantic if you call them planets instead of wanderers. Come on, we're going for romance here.
There are seven stars, I can't remember how many there are in the Ptolemaic system.
At this point.
Only five, right? And
Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn.
Well, what about the sun and the moon? So they count.
The sun and the moon aren't wanderers; they're constants.
Oh, that's the moon. That's the moon. I don't know. I don't care anymore. Anyway, we have.
You have to keep caring.
Right, so I mean, I was glad to hear, Hypatia is considered a philosopher, but all of her achievements, such as we know them, deal with mathematics, and especially the Ptolemaic system. One of the joys...
Well, according to this movie, not only did she basically discover heliocentrism, or at least resuscitate it after everybody had dismissed it as bunkum, but she also, wrote Romeo and Juliet and discovered gravity and, I don't know, won some Pulitzer Prizes and probably built the Mayan temples and all kinds of good stuff.
Well, okay.
This version of Hypatia is a really big overachiever, let's put it that way. And also she's hot to the point where every man in the movie notices really, really vividly at one point or another. So our girl has everything. Speaking of things that are beautiful, though, the design of the Library of Alexandria / the Temple of Serapis was really cool. Especially in the aerial shots that Amenabar seems really, really fond of.
Right. I do love the design of the Serapeum, I guess. The movie conflates the Serapeum with the library. And one of the questions that keep coming up in the discourse is how fair that decision was, or what happened to the Library of Alexandria. And
they want you to think of the Library of Alexandria that was burned down while still kind of weaseling their way into the admission that this is not the Library of Alexandria. Right. This is the second Library of Alexandria, which was much less impressive than the Great Library of Alexandria.
Well, they do weasel in a daughter. They call it the daughter library at some point. And the thing
they call the first one the mother library, but yeah.
The Library of Alexandria burned down more than once. The first time was in the days of Caesar and Cleopatra. So, oops. But then it kind of faded away by the 3rd century. So about a century before this film even starts. And they didn't keep, I imagine that there were multiple libraries over the ancient world.
No, and by the time they got to the second one, its primary function was the Serapeum. That's what it was. It had some library stuff in it, but it was kind of like the library at the high school where I teach, is my understanding. Its collection was pretty unimpressive, especially compared to the parent library. But this is not an unimpressive library or temple. This is a very grand library / temple that is home to all kinds of grand ritual stuff and also thousands and thousands of scrolls, from the looks of it.
And a big flipping statue of Serapis, which I think was the coolest part. Because
freaking statue of Serapis.
Because someone built that statue. Someone on Amenabar's team built that statue, and then they got to pull it down. And I was like, how fun is that?
Do you know if they used, models for some of the aerial shots?
I have no clue how they use. Sometimes, when I'm watching movies, I let myself be taken by the fictive dream, and I don't care how much... No, I don't care how they did it as long as it looks cool, and I thought it looked pretty cool when they pulled down Serapis.
Fair enough. It does look pretty cool. It looks, when you're looking at it from overhead, it looks a little bit like a puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
Not to make this sound silly, but like a cereal box maze almost, where you're supposed to trace your way through with your finger, which to me is a fitting design for this sort of library / temple.
I think... what I do like, I've never actually thought how a library with scrolls would actually function, or just popping in scrolls into these little alcoves. And, so you can overhear at different points of the film, they overhear people whispering in the back, and then you have they have their own Dewey Decimal System where they have something written in very, very readable Greek where the history books are kept and where the philosophy books are kept. Some of it's slightly ridiculous, but I've never really thought about what the Library of Alexandria or any of the ancient libraries looked like. And it gave something that felt real. It felt like
it did. You can imagine people using this library. It's a very existed in space at the beginning of the movie.
You got me thinking about the Ptolemaic system again. I was going to.
Oh, sorry.
I was going to stand up and defend, her discoursing on Ptolemy, but I think that will take us away from the film into the real Hypatia.
There are lots of circles in the Library of Alexandria too, because circles are super beautiful and perfect. The big main scroll room is a circle, and there's a circle in the ceiling. Everything is circles. Circles are very important, but not as important as we think they are. So then we go out of the Library of Alexandria to the titular Agora, where there is some conflict and social tension happening, because you see the Christians, who until recently have been banned from most parts of the empire, have now been permitted to just run wild through everywhere, and they are causing consternation with the other major religious groups in Alexandria. The firewalking scene, where we meet Ammonius, who turns out to be something of an important fellow. He's one of the important Christians with a capital I over the course of the movie.
Oh, right. So Christian. Sounds like Jack Donaghy talking to Liz Lemon and Chris. So
yes. One of the Christians.
Only Oscar Isaac pronounces it correctly, I noticed. He's the only one that goes
pretty much.
Full Christian. Everyone else is Christian.
Christian, yes. Right. Everybody else is trying to say it in this very proper faux British way, and Oscar Isaac is just like, I'm doing my lines. But anyway, I expected to find the firewalking scene mostly just super cheesy. It's honestly kind of tense. Yeah,
I don't know if they ever explain how Ammonius does the firewalking. I don't know if
they don't, and I appreciated that they never explained how Ammonius does the firewalking. His insistence is that it's a miracle and his lord protected him, and at no point does the movie ever actually contradict this. We can assume, given the movie's biases, that that is not actually what happened, but how he did it is left very ambiguous.
Yeah, I don't know if there's some kind of, like, flame retardant on his shoes or not. I don't know if we're supposed to infer that, but so I want to interject here that Ammonius is a real person. Like, he is a historical person that lived. He's mentioned in the primary source of this movie is an ecclesiastical history written by a fellow named Socrates Scholasticus, who...
Not the Socrates.
No, different Socrates, right? Because the famous Socrates didn't write anything. This guy, he was a... court historian.
Also, he was long dead by this point.
He was also dead. He had also been dead for, at least 800 years? 600? Yep. Between 600 and 800 years. I'm not good at math. Unlike Hypatia. But he was a court historian in Constantinople, and so wrote within, like, living memory. So it's kind of an impressive document. He only has one paragraph about Hypatia, but he says a lot more about Cyril, who he does not like. But Ammonius, he's a minor character in the history, and a full backstory for this guy has been given here. And he's a monk. He's portrayed as a monk. He looks vaguely ethnic. He has some missing teeth. He probably smells bad. And he's supposed to be the idea of what a monk is in late antique Egypt. Which
Agora absolutely does the name of the rose thing, where you can tell who's a good guy and who's a bad guy by whether or not they're hot, with very few exceptions. I
hadn't thought about that. I think there's only...
But for the most part, the good guys, who are, for the most part, Hypatia and her bros, until most of her bros turn on her by the end. But they're all, they look like Rachel Weisz and Oscar Isaac. And who is that? Rupert... who plays Synesius?
The agent from Hellboy.
Yes, Rupert Evans, that's his name. Yeah. So they're the hot ones, and then all of the Parabolani, the kind of Christian moral warriors who patrol the streets of Alexandria, all look like they've been run over by several chariots. The only one who sort of violates this rule is Sami Samir, who plays Cyril. Who is not terribly hard on the eyes, but for the most part, we are very much following the paradigm of hot equals good. But anyway, Ammonius in general, at least for the first half of the movie, Ammonius was probably my favorite character in Agora, because he is one of the characters who is allowed to be somewhat contradictory. Like, we see him, the first thing we see him do is walk across fire himself and then set a random guy who's arguing with him on fire, basically as revenge for laughing at him. So you immediately see, okay, yes, he's an asshole, just like most of the Christians in the movie are. But then later on, you see him trying to convert people to his faith by feeding beggars and prompting them to feed beggars and walking them through, like, the transformation that happens when you engage in that sort of engage in that sort of very direct charity. And yeah, he's a complicated fellow. Like both of these aspects, the cruelty and the care for his fellow man, are allowed to exist side by side in the same person. And that is not something that very many movies in the grand scheme of things do for their cackling villains. He's certainly much more likable than, say, Synesius at first, who the very first thing that we see him doing is getting all prissy about how he is offended by Oscar Isaac's criticism of his Lord's universe.
Right. I'm glad you brought up Synesius. Did we already mention that? You mentioned that he's played by Rupert Evans. He has some very unflattering hair in both halves of the film. Different haircut each time.
Long hair in the second
terrible
half.
Long hair in the first half. He looks like Howard from Big Bang Theory. He was a real person. In fact, he is one of our main informants about Hypatia as a person because he wrote a lot. He wrote some 150 letters. He was a bishop as portrayed in the film. He greatly admired Hypatia, didn't say a bad word about her. But the film is also somewhat unfair to him in that he died before she did. So everything you see in the second half of the film, which takes place in 415, is a lie.
And I understand that, like, he did try to get her to convert, but when she said no, he was like, okay, I still love you.
I didn't read that about him. I read is that he was primarily a Platonist first and kind of a Christian second, to the extent that he did not want to become a bishop because he had doubts about the resurrection. But the bishop...
And in the movie, he's the, you can have no doubts, you must kneel before the scripture guy. So that's really...
Eventually, in the part of the film, that's, complete lies. But, right, he's one of the main students of Hypatia. Not terribly likable. He comes off as kind of a dweeb. The kind that Oscar Isaac would be shoving his head down a public toilet, which we see in the film. We see people on toilets.
We do. He's a dweeb and he's a dweeb and an opportunist.
Whereas Oscar Isaac, who's also an historical person, he plays Orestes, who is eventually the governor of Alexandria. This film decides that he was also a student of Hypatia, which is quite unlikely. But
it also decides that he majorly had the hots for her.
Well, Hypatia was renowned for her. She was supposedly beautiful. That's what the ancient sources say. So I don't really object to Rachel Weisz playing her, at least in the first part of the film, which takes place in 392. But then you fast forward 23 years and she looks exactly the same. Maybe that's cheating a little bit. Oscar Isaac looks the same, and Synesius for some reason looks different. He grew out his hair.
They all look the same. Well, Synesius has grown his hair out, but aside from that, he still looks the same.
Right. So, and making Orestes a student of Hypatia does double duty of filling in the blanks of some people who are anonymous in our ancient sources, and they really wanted to go for some of the salacious stories about Hypatia. It was like, her students did have the hots for her, or at least one student, and this is kind of a great scene in the film. This is something I definitely like, is when Orestes tries to...
Orestes' 500 Days of Summer boombox moment in the theater.
Right, so you're conflating two different films, but anyway, I mean, it's kind of the same principle. This is from a real ancient source, is that she had a student who was hot for teacher. She told him, why don't you calm your passions with music? And that's not really how music usually works, but...
it's not known for calming the passions.
No, but Orestes is that student, according to the film, and he makes a public display of his love for Hypatia. Like in the middle, they're watching some play. I should have looked up the play. It's during an act transition where he goes on stage with his aulos, his pan flute, and he plays
which he plays very badly.
And this is one of the few times you see the Earth again. Like, it zooms out, and you can still hear him playing his damn aulos from space.
It's really funny.
That's a legitimately funny scene. I laughed out loud for that. And he gives it to Hypatia. She's like, thanks. And then it transitions to the second half of the salacious story, which is also in the salacious part, which is also in one of the ancient sources about Hypatia. Is that I don't know if this is one of the parts that you liked of the film or not. or if it's just something that I like. I actually think that they...
I also laughed at this scene, if it's the one I think you're about to describe.
Right. I think they actually kind of botched it a little, because I imagine it a little differently, is that when the student, according to this source, which is actually, it's a biography of Isidore, written by a fellow named Damascius, who is the last pagan head of the academy in Athens, the Platonic Academy. And he compared his teacher to Hypatia, and he said that Hypatia dealt with the student. After music didn't work, she brought her menstrual pad to class, and she threw it at him and said, "This is what you're in love with. Find beauty in that." And she does the same thing to Orestes, except she's a little less sarcastic. She's kind of, she goes, "You gave me a gift, and here's one in return." He gives her the rag, and the rag unfolds, and it's filled with blood. She goes, "This is." So she says,
she just gently hands it to him.
Yes, that's not what I mean. That's not how I imagine it. It's also the way she uses some Victorian term for it. She goes, "This is
the blood of my cycle."
Yes, she goes, "I don't see any beauty in that." So I guess it wasn't a circle. And then we forgot to mention the point of view character. We haven't talked about the effective main character of this film yet.
I was going to transition into Davis after this.
Davis the Slavis, yes.
Davis the Slavis, yes.
So he's watching this from afar, and he's so afraid. He's in love with his mistress, and he's so afraid that Orestes is going to get her that he was impressed by Ammonius's miraculous display, and so he became a Christian. And his first prayer to God is, don't let him have her. Don't let anyone else have her. And so this is a fulfillment of his prayer that, Davis is kind of he has a couple kinks, because I think he collects the menstrual pad, and then later in the film we see him caressing her foot. And then
it's really weird.
So there are a couple other scenes that make you think this person maybe has some issues. Or maybe it's the result of being a slave in antiquity.
There's one of those scenes in particular, because Davis is... so he is Hypatia's personal slave.
Fictional character.
Though at one point she lets him teach her class. So I don't know. He has it pretty well as far as slaves go, I guess. But he is also majorly in love with his mistress, indeed. But he has also been seduced by the Christians all over the streets of Alexandria, especially after Ammonius shows him how wonderful feeding the beggars makes you feel.
It's not just that. It's I'm kind of glad that Davis's introduction to Christianity, it's not just like the hocus pocus of Ammonius walking on fire, and also throwing a pagan into the fire. Forgot that part. Ammonius has a cruel streak. He takes him to see the bishop preaching, and it's Theophilus, another real person, preaching the Beatitudes, and then showing him, one of the reasons that eventually Christianity did overtake paganism was their care for the poor and hospitality. In fact, hospitals. Yeah, no,
he's seduced. He's seduced by the actual beauty of the practice of Christianity.
And Ammonius, according to this film, is one of the Parabolani, and the Parabolani were basically hospital workers. They had some kind of social function. It was outlined in the Theodosian Code. He was not, the real Ammonius was a monk, though. It was just slightly different. We'll talk about the monks later. Maybe not.
Maybe.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, so it shows at least the good aspects of Christianity, and it's not all about, the Christians were throwing pagans into fire pits, just for shits and giggles.
In general, another thing that I thought that the movie did very well as far as its themes went was that it did showcase really well the futility of religious conflict. There is a lot of people shouting at each other about their religious beliefs over the course of the film, and at no time is the impression ever given that this will lead to anything productive or good, no matter who the shouters are. The only thing that will lead to productive and good is being in Hypatia's class and learning about the beauty of circles, because that is where wisdom happens, and also maybe in the Library of Alexandria. Running around the streets shouting about your Lord and our gods and your savior and etc. Only ever leads to bloodshed.
Right. Well, I guess that leads us to what really is the centerpiece of the film is when the Serapeum is torn down, which begins not when Christians decide they've had enough of seeing Serapis, who's kind of this. He is a syncresis between native Egyptian gods and Greek gods. He's kind of a Zeus plus Asclepius. He has a pot on his head for some reason. But the violence begins, it's like in according to Socrates Scholasticus, what happened is that the Christians were renovating a church when they came across some relics of ancient Egyptian religion. And I remember reading somewhere that was like relics of Osiris, and Osiris, there's a weird thing about his phallus that was preserved. And they displayed these. Theophilus, the bishop, had them displayed, and they were making fun of them. And this got the pagans really upset. And they decided to attack the Christians, as portrayed in the film. And this turned out to be a really bad idea, because even though the film treats Christianity like its legalization happened yesterday, it had been 70-ish years since then, and there were probably more Christians than pagans in the city.
There are a lot of Christians in Alexandria.
A lot of Christians, and they're very angry that they're being attacked by a mob, and so they do a counterattack. And there was a tense standoff at the Serapeum, and then they appear.
Yeah, their counterattack is really effective, and the pagans end up imprisoned inside the Serapeum. And eventually an envoy from the emperor shows up and says, okay, we're going to pardon all of the pagans, and they can leave. But after they leave, the Christians get to do whatever they want.
Right, so
to the Serapeum.
On the one hand, they appeal to the emperor, who at the beginning of the film would have been Theodosius I, a very important emperor because Christianity had been legalized in the time of Constantine, but Theodosius made it the state religion. Mm-hmm. So kind of a stupid idea to appeal to him, expecting him to show tolerance to the pagans. So Theodosius had briefly reunited the empires, even though when we actually hear his name, he's still only the Eastern Roman Emperor. I bring this up because the Star Wars title cards make a big deal about that, and that made me mad, as if the empire was just coming apart now. The Christians tear apart the Serapeum, and it's quite a sight. It's an exciting scene, to be honest. It's like when I first watched
There's a tremendous shot late in the sacking of the library where he's been, again, Amenabar really loves aerial shots, and for good reason. He uses them really well. There's one in particular where I think he speeds up the movement of the Christians who are running around destroying the library, and it makes them look like bugs.
Well, there's actually a shot of ants before. There's a shot where it goes over the ramparts, and you see ants on the ramparts or on the walls of the Serapeum before you see the Christians in their camp. And then when they rush into the Serapeum, it's kind of recreating that, except this time it's the Christians who look like swarming ants. Yes, that is.
Yeah, they look like swarming ants that have taken over the Serapeum, and it is an arresting shot.
Yes, when I first watched this movie, I was by myself. My wife wandered in during the sack of the Serapeum, and
good time to come in.
Right, she looks at that and she goes, "What the hell is going on?" It was like, when I'm watching this movie, you have Christians here sacking a pagan temple, and she goes, "Huh, that's not something you usually see in a movie." And I was like, "That's exactly right. That's not something you see in a movie every day." As I'm used to, all these films that take place in the first century where, the Romans are the nasty people, and you have Jews and nasty Christians are being martyred by Romans. But,
as it turns out, there are far more Jesus movies than there are, and Jesus time movies than there are Hypatia movies.
Hypatia was also Cyril of Alexandria movies. He hasn't, he doesn't
also,
even
there aren't a whole lot of Cyril of Alexandria movies.
No,
indeed.
Unfortunately not. Right. I also really like the scene where it's like when the Christians are throwing around the scrolls. So they destroy the idols, of course. And they're also throwing around the scrolls. Hypatia has tried to save the major works. That's one of the cornier lines of dialogue saying, "Forget the lesser works. Which ones are the lesser works?"
Which ones are the lesser works? I love that guy's delivery so much, though.
They're throwing around the scrolls like toilet paper, and then eventually the camera turns upside down. And you see, the ceiling of the Serapeum, but it's upside down.
The thing that I noticed the most in the upside down scene was the horse that then wandered into the center of the scene.
Yes, so that does happen too. Holy spaces that are conquered, as they use them for stables sometimes, so they turn them into,
which they did in this one.
Yeah,
the next time we see it, it's full of farm creatures.
Usually they turn into a church, that's or a mosque or whatever, what have you. Whoever's conquering turns it into, or a sushi place. They find some utility for it, especially the building was beautiful. But I guess
makes sense.
So anyway, that's 392, the first half of the film, and probably the stronger
Before
half.
we move on from the first half of the film, I do think the relationship between Hypatia and Theon, her dad, is really sweet.
Yes, Theon is played by a French actor. Oh shoot, I didn't have it in front of me. Yes, he was
Michel something.
Just a second. I have to do a quick.
I thought it was Michael, but he's French, so
and
probably
he looks like a Greek philosopher. That was great casting.
He also kind of looks like Mark Hamill, to the point where at first I thought maybe he was Mark Hamill. It says Michael Lonsdale.
Michael Lonsdale, yes.
Michael Lonsdale.
He was in a film called Of Gods and Men, which came out a few years after Agora, and it's about Catholic priests in Algeria during the Civil War. Like the 90s Civil War, and it's a particularly good film. Similar this one in some ways. Don't get too attached to the characters.
Indeed.
But yeah, he looks like a bust of Socrates. And the real Theon was not in charge of the Serapeum, and he did not make the stupid call to attack the Christians. So this is another way in which his character assassination also, they took out the needless, economy of characters. There's no reason to introduce a new character when you could just use one you've already got.
And even if he's a lousy temple official, he seems like a good dad.
Yeah. So
he's very invested in his daughter living her best life.
Probably he was a mathematician as well. He was very invested in the Ptolemaic system. I mean, he wrote a commentary on the Almagest, which the real Hypatia prepared. Like, she prepared the text for that, and that's probably her most lasting achievement. And that it
is suggested in this film that Theon and Hypatia may have invented the astrolabe, which I do not think is correct.
They constructed an astrolabe together, but I believe the astrolabe had been around since antiquity. It is antiquity, but earlier antiquity. Right. So no, that's horseshit. Some things in this film are horseshit.
Father-daughter projects are great, right?
Well, they did the real Theon and Hypatia did most of their work together. It was conjoined. Yeah. And I can
totally buy these two as having not just been father and daughter, but also like work buddies over the years.
Yeah, I did think that is it's a nice father-daughter moment. Especially since Hypatia doesn't. My sister-in-law, she pointed out after the film was over that it failed the Bechdel test. And
well, there aren't really any other women in it,
exactly.
Are there? Aside from random girls on the streets.
There are no other named female characters of which Hypatia could talk about mathematics. And even after I read a biography of Hypatia, she goes, well, what other women did she talk to? And I go, I don't, it's unclear. It's unclear if Hypatia ever talked to another woman in her life. And we don't even know her mother's name, so we can't even name that. But anyway, the second part of this film with only one female character of note.
Indeed. So then we go to 415.
Right. And the first thing we see in 415 is we see Theophilus, the bishop, lying in state. He has just passed away. And who comes and picks up his ring? But Cyril of Alexandria.
Alexandria.
This is when shit gets real. And I think actor, you don't think the actor was handsome? Do you think that the good and evil is coded by good looks here?
No, I said he's the one exception. I said that Cyril is the one exception to the hot equals good rule.
Right. So he's only, well, first of all, he became bishop in 412. He was only 34 years old. So he's 37-ish at this point in the film. That's younger than I am now, which is incredible when I think about it. But we only see the public face of Cyril. We don't really get his inner thoughts, which I guess is, how would we know what they are anyway?
Honestly, I think the funeral scene is the closest that we get to some of his inner thoughts. There's this moment in the funeral scene where Cyril goes to the dead Theophilus, picks up his dead, waxy, pallid hand, kisses it, and then very deliberately slides the ring from his finger, and then very deliberately slides it onto his own. And that, to me, was one of the best grace notes of characterization that we got for this version of Cyril in the movie.
Right. So one of the reasons that I was so interested in Cyril of Alexandria is, first of all, he is a saint in the church. He's a doctor of the church, which means that his writings are important. And they are important. He was very important in Christological controversies. He, in the crusade against paganism, he wrote a very long work against the Emperor Julian, who was the last pagan emperor of Rome, not mentioned by this film, which I consider an omission. He's also the only person to have preserved Julian's writings. We only know Julian's own writings based off of Cyril's refutation. But when I examine his personal life, I wonder, this is someone who is a savant. You know, he was very intelligent. But was he actually a good person? And from what I know about him, I'm not convinced. I do not know if Cyril was actually, this is why I want to know his inner disposition. Was he a good Christian? Was he a good human being? Was he any degree of holy? Because I get the sense that he was more of a politician. It's difficult to
say.
Well, yeah, see, I mean,
isn't it?
We only have, his writings, which are all like, his commentary in the Old Testament. It's hard to tell, when he's writing against Julian the Apostate. How are we supposed to know? It's like he invented and then refuted the Nestorian heresy is the main thing, is he made enemies out of other Christians. Which this film doesn't really focus on. He had plenty of...
Well, he was one of the major players in the Theotokos versus Christotokos debate, wasn't he?
That's the Nestorian controversy, yes.
Yeah.
So
was Mary, for those of you listening, and as we go off on crazy tangents here, the question was basically, was Mary the mother of God or merely the mother of the human Christ?
Well, I think that Nestorius didn't like the term Theotokos, which is mother of God. And
God bearer.
Right, the God bearer. Thank you for correcting my Greek. Cyril took this kind of insipid comment. It was like Nestorius, I don't think, thought through to the end what that premise means. Like, if Mary is not the mother of God, then what is she the mother of? And then Cyril exploited that. As I said, he invented the heresy of Nestorianism and then refuted it and made Nestorius look like a fool. Bested him at the council and had him expelled from the empire. Where he then created a splinter church in Persia. And then Cyril inadvertently caused another schism in the church after his death. We don't need to get into that. That's basically
so the elements of this that are important for the movie are that both in the movie and in in real life, Cyril is a politician at least as much as he is a bishop.
Yes, exactly. And a theologian.
And also definitely a schemer who does not treat his enemies kindly.
Yes. So, even like the real Cyril, when he acceded to the throne, there was a controversy. There was a rival bishop, which led to street fighting, and which led to him expelling the people who opposed the wrong bishop, like who did not support him. He got rid of the former bishop, and he expelled the Christians that didn't support him, and he seized their church. Mm-hmm. And then we start with the second controversy of his episcopate, which is the Jewish controversy, which is kicks off the second half of the film.
Cyril, not a big fan of the Jews.
Well, who was? In this period of time, is this time we have Jerome, who didn't care for the Jews, and Augustine, who liked the Jews better than
Orestes
most.
was relatively tolerant of the Jews, wasn't he? It was a big point of contention between him and Cyril.
It was. Orestes.
Oh yeah, at this point, Orestes is prefect of.
Right, yes. And a Christian. He was not a Christian in the first half of the film. And what we know about Orestes in history it's basically he was the governor appointed by Constantinople. He probably was Christian. Probably was always Christian. And as a secular ruler, his primary goal is to establish peace and not have people fighting in the streets. And what happened in real life is a little more complicated than what happens in the film. Should we just talk about what happens in the film?
I think so.
Yeah.
Before we do that, I will say that I really like baby Oscar Isaac, based on a sample size of 2, is now becoming a bit of a theme here on Your Movie Rocks. He's even more of a baby here than he was in Sucker Punch.
I totally forgot he was in Sucker Punch. But Sucker Punch came out after this. Right, okay, more of a baby.
It did, yeah. I said he's more of a baby in this one.
Okay.
But I like his performance a lot here. I think that he gives the character more layers than exist in the script.
Yes, I think...
For the character.
I think, frankly, I don't think there's a performance I dislike in this film. There's some
I did not love Max Minghella.
Be careful. I don't remember who that is. Who is that?
He is. It's true. Just kidding. I loved Max Minghella a lot. No, he did.
Davis.
No, he.
Right? Okay.
Yeah, Davis. Okay. He's Davis. No, he's a good silent actor. Let's put it that way. He's really good at acting with his eyebrows and with his mouth.
Right.
Those are the two aspects of his performance that I really dug.
Right.
Oscar Isaac.
I probably agree with you. Yes, I probably the weaker link, but I felt like most of the name actor. Well, I guess Oscar Isaac wasn't a name yet, but I liked his performance.
He's his version of Orestes that I think exists more in his performance than in the script is someone who is always really trying to do right by his principles and by the people that he cares about,
he keeps fucking
and is also kind of too much of a coward to really achieve either one of those things.
Right. So, the beginning, so the Jewish controversy begins when the Christians show up for no reason. I think the Jews are at a theater.
Yeah, it's the Sabbath. They're enjoying a play.
They're enjoying a play, and the Christians just stone them. They throw things at them. I don't know if it's rotten food or if there's...
I think it was stones.
It's just pure stones, right? So this there's
a lot of stoning in this movie.
Unbridled act of hostility, and like they both, like Cyril and the Jewish leaders, they appear before Orestes, and something makes
Cyril's
me think
just like,
that,
well, they deserved it.
Well, when they talk about eating sweets, it makes me wonder: is this supposed to be like a Rosh Hashanah celebrations? I don't remember when the controversy actually. If we have a timing on when the controversy actually broke out, it's very rare to see Jews, like, you don't have films about late antiquity at all, and when you do have them, you don't see ancient Judaism represented, right? You have Jews in all the films about Christ, and about biblical times, but you don't have them in films like this, and that was something that really kind of, especially because they play like a key part, and they're not just the victims. Either. I mean, they begin as the victims and they get their revenge.
No, they do their share of shouting about religion in the streets and it leading nowhere good.
Right. Okay. So the next, the consequence of the sequence is actually it was a part of after the Serapeum being destroyed, it was a part of the film that really kind of, shocked me, it's something you just don't see in movies. And
the murder/expulsion of the Jews?
No, before that. What gets them expelled.
Or the ambush.
Yes.
Are you talking about the ambush?
The ambush, when they claim that the church is on fire. It's like someone shouts to the Parabolani, there's one of the churches in the city is on fire, and they come rushing to help. And it's a trap. It's like the Jews lock them in their own church, and then they stone them from the rafters, some of them to death. I was like, when they're done,
it's incredibly brutal.
Yes, as you don't. That's something.
It's a very affecting scene, and a very well choreographed scene.
You do not see typically Jews killing Christians in your pepla. That's really kind of a sensitive topic. But that is something Socrates Scholasticus does write about, something similar having taken place. That the Jews didn't like one of Cyril's agents harassing them, so they decided to get revenge. And as a result, they were expelled from Alexandria yet again. The thing that surprised me is I didn't realize there were still Jews in Alexandria at all at that time, because when you read about the first century and the second century, the beginning of the second century, all the Jews were expelled from Alexandria after a big revolt. In the time of Trajan, this is like 300 years before that, so I guess they crept back in, but I don't know how or when. And so this made me wanting to go running to my books.
You always do.
The only film I know of about antiquity that shows Jews killing Christians, which is something. And then you have the more typical stuff. The Jews are expelled from the city, and you see them being like women having their clothes torn off them in the streets, and people. You see that all
bodies
the time.
Bodies piled up, and hauled away.
And it looks like a cross between Schindler's List and the ending of Fiddler on the Roof. When they're singing Anatevka. So that's more pedestrian, but not less horrifying. Mm-hmm. And Cyril gives an anti-Jewish sermon, which is very typical of the period, late antiquity.
Indeed.
About
and also pretty typical of Cyril.
I don't know. I imagine that Cyril did not have enlightened views of the Jews, but I don't know of any specifically anti-Jewish writing, as he is more interested in carving division among Christians. If you know any off the top of your head,
I feel like I had to read
It's like Augustine wrote a lot about the Jews. Jerome...
Something of Cyril's that was against the Jews.
Wrote a lot about the Jews. Well, this is not... it has nothing to do with the film, but it's his views. I would not be surprised if he held exactly the views he's portrayed as having in the film. Where he says that they're blind to the reality of Christ and we should pity them because they don't know what they're doing, but we're also going to expel them from the city.
We don't want to deal with them anymore.
Because they're permanent exiles.
You know who else this version of Cyril really doesn't like is women who don't know their place.
Right.
And as it turns out, we have a woman who doesn't know her place, spending most of the second half of the movie doing geometry and astronomy.
Right, Hypatia becomes very passive in the second half of the movie, which is kind of unfortunate, but also when you have 5 paragraphs of information about a figure from ancient history, what are you supposed to do?
Make stuff up?
Well, yeah, they do make stuff up. So, I mean, she's in the process of discovering heliocentrism, and even though that's a patently absurd idea that she, discovered it in the 5th century and told no one about it.
But I do like the visualization of the process.
It does. The process of discovery is very well portrayed, I thought. And the excitement.
She's so excited about the ellipse. She's rapturously, orgasmically excited about the ellipse.
And her slave is very whatever. This is a different... Davis the Slavist has been released after a distasteful rape scene that we skipped over.
Has he actually joined the Parabolani?
Yes, he is a Parabolaninos at this point, and an emancipated slave.
And now we have Aspasius the Slavus, which is not as catchy.
Right, yes. So he's still with her, and he has to listen to her talk about ellipses. The scene where she discovers...
He's supportive.
She finally gives up on the circle idea and figures, it must be an ellipse. That the Earth is circling, the Earth is following an ellipse around the sun. Of course, the choice of heliocentrism was deliberate to remind people... as a lot of people don't know who Hypatia is, but a lot of people know about the Galileo affair. And
they were very, very transparently trying to remind everybody of Galileo.
And if they're very smart, they know about Giordano Bruno as well. So they don't bring up Galileo; they bring up Copernicus. The audience,
the target audience of this movie was absolutely people who watch Cosmos, through which they may have heard about Giordano Bruno, because he's brought up in the Neil deGrasse Tyson version of it.
Oh, really? Well,
I imagine...
Carl Sagan mentions Hypatia, so if they had watched the OG Cosmos, they would have gotten,
I bet Carl Sagan brought up Giordano Bruno, too.
Yeah, well, anyway. We're not going to go through...
nice things.
We're not going to go through all the martyrs to science, of which Copernicus is not one.
Neither is Giordano Bruno, but we're not getting into that right now.
He's a martyr to something, Copernicus.
He's a martyr to being like a new age crackpot who pissed off all his neighbors.
Okay, well that's okay. Anyway, back to the movie.
But yes, nice things, movie.
There is a scene of... You're getting to the scene where Cyril is, celebrating the liturgy, and he's reading from a codex, and it is a very cool looking codex. And I wanted that codex. And I had to pause the movie at this point because you can see perfectly nice, Greek on one side. On the left side is a language that I did not know, and it is not Coptic. And I paused it, and I talked over my sister-in-law to my colleague. What language is that? And she was like, runes? It's like, now I want that codex. It was like a nice piece of production design. I don't know what language they thought they were putting on it.
Something they made up. They figured nobody like you would ever watch it.
You know what? I'm going to pause it, and I'm definitely going to find out what Greek text is on the right page. She's supposed to be reading from the first letter of Paul to Timothy, which is not something real Cyril tried to make real Orestes, recognize his ecclesiastical authority as kneel down before the Gospels, basically saying, I'm in charge of this town, not you, which Orestes didn't go for. Here, Cyril is reading the passage about how no woman should instruct a man, and then asks for people to kneel in front of, the holy book. First of all, that's not a gospel passage. Second of all, it's just an epistle. Mm-hmm. But he asks people to kneel in front of his cool codex anyway, and Orestes refuses to do that, which leads to a couple things, one of which is a dramatically important turn in the story, but I want to focus on Synesius is in town, even though he's been dead for 2 years. but he's in town. He
was playing with the conic sections with Hypatia. He indirectly helped with heliocentrism. What a nice guy.
But he's supposed to be the reasonable one. Like, he is the Christian that did not participate in the riots. He was actually in the Serapeum with Hypatia, and you think he's going to set Orestes straight. And he doesn't. He's become more devoutly Christian, according to this movie. And he has one of the great lines. I laughed so hard when he said this. He said, Cyril's right, that's what the text says. And he goes, Orestes, how many women do you obey? And then I shouted out, like, back in the screen, how many women? And then Rupert Everett says much the same thing, how many women? And it was like, why did you say that name? Type of thing. And Oscar Isaac gives his face like, I don't know, 3 type thing. He has this befuddled look on his face. And then Synesius answers for him. He goes, one woman. So this is very unfair to the real Synesius. At this point, it's just a construct. Synesius, who...
Well, again, like you said, he's been dead for 2 years by now.
He was a very upstanding guy, and I'd like to read some of his letters. He sounds like a very interesting person, who is also interested in some of the more, esoteric elements of Platonism, the Chaldean oracles and that stuff, that nonsense.
He also flipped on a dime against Hypatia here. Like, up until that point, he'd been kind of broing it up with her.
I really hate that. I was like, this is kind of the climactic. I don't know if we should dial back and talk about Ammonius, who... Oh, yeah,
because Ammonius dies, too. I liked his funeral. I like the funerals in this movie.
Ammonius throws a rock at Orestes after he refuses to bow before the Gospel Codex. And that is all we know.
He hits him real hard, too.
That's all you know about the real Ammonius. Like, the historical Ammonius, that's what he's famous for. He was a monk that, when Cyril wasn't getting his way, he basically invited all the monks from the surrounding territories to come into Alexandria and throw a shit fit. And monks in those days, like, the monastery is where you went when you wanted to leave society, and also if you're expelled from society. Like, if you're a criminal. So, calling in the monks is like releasing all the January 6th defendants, and asking them to come to DC again. And that's, it was kind of like that. So, Ammonius the real Ammonius, as the fictional Ammonius, was tortured to death by Orestes, which is what you can do when you're the governor of a city and you're attacked. And Cyril did declare Ammonius a martyr as a power play. And did give him a new name. I don't know why he gave him a new name. It's like now St. Timasius. I'm pretty sure he's no longer on the books.
mean, the God of Abraham loves to change people's names. For example, Abraham's. So why should his representatives on Earth not do the same?
Very, very strange, though. I have to look into that, why Cyril would have done that. I thought that was something the movie made up, but no, it's real. And this is
interesting.
This is the scene, like his... I guess it's a funeral. It looks more like an autopsy, but that's where you see all the Christians gathered together, and they are all bearded and wearing black, and it's the point, if you hadn't thought this before, that maybe the Christians in this film are not just Christians. Maybe they represent other religious groups as well that don't like women, and don't like statues of things, and don't like the fine arts, and etc.
And occupy areas of the world near the Middle East and...
Like, for instance, like Egypt. Anyway. Right, so Synesius at the end was like, Orestes calls in Hypatia and says, we can't protect you unless you become a Christian. And Synesius does this thing where he says, you taught us that we're all brothers, and that, if 2 of us are alike, then the third is alike. So basically saying that she's a crypto-Christian. Like Christians who were interested in Platonism, which is a lot of the intellectuals in the Christian tradition, possibly Cyril as well, would have treated Plato and Aristotle with great respect. Plato especially, who was more theological minded, and would have viewed Plato as a Christian before the letter, would not have felt the same way about contemporary Platonists, depending on them. Some of them wrote tractates against Christians. But, Synesius himself was definitely a Platonist.
And there were certainly...
And it's not a contradiction to be both a Christian and a Platonist. And he probably saw...
No, there were tons of them. Like, the same was basically true of Augustine.
Yes, exactly. Well, Augustine definitely, yes. Still alive at the time this film was taking place, which is very exciting for me.
He's also not here, though.
But yeah, so anyway, he's appealing to Hypatia the Platonist. We really don't see that aspect of Hypatia in the film. Even though she calls herself a philosopher until, like, she says, I believe in philosophy.
She believes in philosophy, yes.
Even though until then she has just been working with mathematics. And Synesius he goes, oh, what a pity. And this time I picked up, he makes a comment about her heliocentrism as well, which I thought was undeserved. I was like, why would Synesius give a shit about this? He goes, and you're working on, and you believe that the Earth goes around the sun. What nonsense.
So my immediate thought there was, how did he know? Because was he there when she and
don't think so.
Vespasius, I really wish, the slave Zeus, were...
I really feel that I did not remember that line until I watched the movie most recently. I definitely remember the what a pity. But the comment about heliocentrism, it feels so...
I guess she told him at some point, because he liked her conic sections.
It's like,
sounds like a euphemism for something.
No one in the 5th century was thinking about heliocentrism. Everyone was intra-Ptolemy in his epicycles.
Well, this version of Hypatia was.
Yeah, well, it's just such a throwaway line that I think diminishes a character that we're supposed to sympathize with. And a film that I felt like, the film definitely has a point of view, but it also makes, for the most part, I feel like it shows everyone's viewpoint to some degree. It is not, I suspect we'll disagree with it, but I don't feel like it's a harangue. I feel like it's mostly fair to its characters, but this was not fair to Synesius, this part.
But it's also there, for this particular scene, it's also there to clearly contrast and juxtapose Hypatia and her steadfastness against these two extraordinarily cowardly men.
Yes. And then we don't see any of the major characters again. Well, yes, Davis, of course. Its depiction of the death of Hypatia. It seems like she's arrested walking home. And one of the articles I was reading was complaining about how much they bungled the death of Hypatia. As you get the idea of like a mob violence, and she was torn apart on the way home. And here, like, she's arrested. They take her into the church for no clear reason, but that's in the sources. I don't know why they took her into the church, especially since they stripped her naked. And they add some dialogue.
Maybe they thought it was humiliating somehow for her to die in a church?
It's humiliating to strip her naked, but then in the movie when the guy says, now, Lord, you can look at her whoredom, or something like here. It's like, take a look at this whore. It's like, pretty sure God could see her from out there too. It's just, or you just bring a naked, like, you're desecrating a church, but bringing a naked pagan into it, and a menstruating person as well. So that's, And then there's what...
Wait, was she menstruating at this point?
No, but she's a menstruating person, There's a big...
right.
She's
going to menstruate all over the altar.
Strangely, I remember, like, Gregory the Great, it was a couple centuries after this, talking about how women who are menstruating shouldn't receive the Eucharist. So some of those Levitical laws were still on the books to some capacity. It's a big risk when you bring a naked woman to a church. You don't know what she's going to do. But then they have this ridiculous scene with her and Davis. I was like,
because Davis decides as his last act of love to like spare her a painful death.
Right. So he gives her a mercy killing, but not before he thinks about his whole life and the relationship together, including the feet touching.
Yeah, we get to see him stroking her feet again.
Yes. So, and then so she doesn't actually get to experience the painful death that she is most famous for. And they stone her. She's supposed to be torn apart with potsherds, but they stone her. And they have to collect the stones.
Instead, they stone her already dead body. Yeah.
Already dead body. And then we zoom out, and we see...
But also, this is good, because she had said earlier that as long as she was able to die knowing the secret and contemplating the beauty of the universe, and as she dies, she looks up into the circle at the top of the church, except that from her point of view, it's an ellipse.
Right. I actually thought
So she dies in rapture because she gets to look at the ellipse.
I don't know. I can't. Well, she's unconscious at this point, so I don't think she actually.
But no, she gets to see the ellipse as she's being smothered. It's the last thing that passes before her eyes.
I see.
Is that she knows she's discovered all the secrets.
Well, I don't know what the use is of having made a major scientific discovery if you take it with you to the grave. But apparently this film thought that was a good thing. And then it says, she was like Copernicus, even though she was nothing like Copernicus. Copernicus was a canon of his local church. And he got to write his book and publish it in his lifetime, and he didn't get into trouble for it because no one made a fuss about it until Bruno and Galileo.
Also, being that Hypatia was a Platonist and a follower of Plotinus, she was also nothing like Copernicus in that she, historically, would not have done this sort of thing, because the Platonists don't really believe in experimentation and empiricism and getting together with your collaborators to solve the world's problems. They believe in sitting by yourself in a room and reasoning out the truth of the universe.
Well, that depends on what kind of Platonist you are. As I read a lot in the secondary literature, this is totally irrelevant to the film. Whether you belong to the school of Porphyry, who did that kind of navel-gazing, and Iamblichus, who did a different sort of navel-gazing when they try to get, statues of gods to talk to them and stuff like that, and probably held seances. Hypatia probably wasn't so interested in Iamblichus. At least that's the conclusion.
I don't remember enough about these guys to say for sure, but I think that Plotinus was more of the Porphyrian sort.
Well, I mean, he was Porphyrius' teacher, so you'd imagine.
Yeah, I did not remember that particular relationship at all.
Right, so Plotinus doesn't even get mentioned in this film. Plato gets mentioned once, dismissively. So, but I mean, Hypatia, her published works, which have not survived, what she wrote were all about mathematics, so it's not entirely unfair to portray her principally as a mathematician, although she clearly taught philosophy as well, because the real Synesius tells us that she did. But anyway,
Indeed.
that is Agora.
But also, from a movie maker's perspective, let us also consider this movie already did not have a massive audience that it was targeting. And if you started going into all the Neoplatonist and various schools of Neoplatonism and that kind of shit, you were going to lose 2/3 of your remaining audience.
You know who would have done it?
You needed to have something that you could see. And we can see her figuring out the ellipse.
You know who would have done that? If Eggers had directed this film, there would have been a lot of Plotinus in it. So I've been thinking a lot about, is it Robert Eggers? If Robert Eggers had directed Agora, how much better it would be, because I definitely think it would be better.
Well, he has a long career in front of him. Maybe he can make his own late antique movie. It would be up his alley, would it not?
I hope he does. He has not gone that far back in time yet. But I would very much like him to do that instead of remaking films that were already brilliant the first time.
That would be cool. Anyway, then we get some crawl text at the end. That's what it's called, crawl text. Except it doesn't crawl. About how great Hypatia was and how Cyril became a saint and doctor of the church.
Right, for things that are
completely
unrelated to the things portrayed in the film. So I said that the crawl text is the stuff I hate the most about this film, and it probably should all be scrubbed. I would scrub all of it and just have, Alexandria 415 or Alexandria 392.
It does give us some nice shots of some nice, very aerial shots of Egypt, though.
I do like that. I mean, I do like the planet Earth stuff, the cosmic scope.
Yeah.
And it ties in nice to that. I don't really mind the heliocentrism stuff. It ties into that theme, at least. I don't mind that, the fiction of her inventing heliocentrism, but I do mind the crawl text saying, Cyril bad, Hypatia good.
There's a sense of awe and wonder about the heliocentrism stuff and all the beauty of the cosmos stuff that gives a nice touch.
It's just so Manichaean, and Manichaeism is a heresy.
It's true. You don't want to piss off the Christians even more. All right, have we recapped the entire movie at this point? I think we have.
I think so, yes.
Okay, so what do you think I really thought of this movie?
Right, so something I could see out at the beginning of this, I know you had seen this film before, I knew you didn't like it, and I assigned it to you anyway, so I'm going to guess at 2 stars.
Can you see through the camera?
1.5, ow, that's rough. All right.
This movie makes me really angry. If I'm being objective about it, which I can't be, craft-wise, it certainly deserves more than that. But the critic must admit that she is a human, and to use the parlance of the youths these days, I can't even with this movie. It's funny, I was thinking, so one of my very favorite movies is Amadeus, which also takes the stories of real people and absolutely bastardizes them beyond recognition. And anybody who has learned the life story of Salieri from Amadeus has not, in fact, learned anything correct about the life story of Salieri. I think the reason that doesn't bother me is because both Salieri and Mozart are such notable figures with such enormous histories and documentations written of them that, like, the truth is present. It's not being hidden from you. We know how both of these people actually lived. And also, in the movie, they're so transparently walking metaphors that I don't feel like anybody seriously watching the film could mistake them for real human men. What I really hate that this movie does, and that a lot of historical dramas are guilty of doing, but I think this one bothers me more because it's something that I sort of know about, is I don't like it when movies turn dead people into playthings, especially dead people who have no names and can't speak for themselves. Like, these people, even the famous ones among these people, are not as well documented as either Mozart or Salieri. You have brought up several times when I was not allowed to how patently unfair the movie is to many of its figures, like Synesius certainly, but also Cyril, who was a much more interesting person than the film gets him credit for. And I know that it's already a 2-hour movie and you need a villain in there somewhere. But also, most of the people watching this has never heard of Cyril of Alexandria, and this is the impression they're going to get of him.
Can I interject here? As someone who actually, I have read Cyril, and I admire him, at least as an intellectual, but I would not, this film is unfair to a lot of people, but I don't think it's unfair to Cyril.
Cyril would not have preached that epistle.
First of all, Cyril doesn't need to be defended by anyone. He's still a doctor of the church. He's not going anywhere. Like, his writings are not going anywhere. People aren't going to burn Cyril's writings because it's Agora and got angry. So I don't.
Yeah, but at least be a dick to him for things he actually did.
Well, it doesn't. First of all, when people argue about Hypatia and the science versus religion debate, they're really arguing about Cyril. And the question that they want to have answered is, did Cyril kill Hypatia? Like, did he order her to be killed? And I don't think the film takes his hands off on that question. Like, even Socrates Scholasticus, who didn't like Cyril, doesn't blame him for her death. He even names the head of the mob. It was a guy named Peter the deacon. He doesn't blame Cyril for her death. Though he does say it was a black market. It was a black market as episcopate. The emperor was furious. They had to bribe a lot of people to calm them down. We only see Cyril as, almost everything that Cyril does in this movie is something that the real Cyril did, except for the preaching on Timothy, which is, a lie to keep the film. Which
again, he wouldn't have done.
But
he did not.
He would have.
It's very likely that he
would have humiliated Orestes, though. He would have used the gospel.
Certainly, and that's actually probably why Hypatia was killed. She wasn't killed for her science or for her teaching or for her menstruating or whatever. She was killed because Cyril's henchmen thought that she was pulling the puppet strings behind Orestes, and they wanted revenge because a bunch of Orestes guys had killed a bunch of Cyril's guys, and they thought that she had masterminded the whole thing.
Right, that's 100% correct. Is that after Orestes got beamed in the head by Ammonius, he stopped going to church, understandably, and that created a rift between him and Cyril, and Hypatia, who was advising Orestes, as depicted in the film, was blamed for that. Unfairly. We know so little about Hypatia that if you choose to tell a story about her, you have to make choices. And this film could have been worse. I don't know if you're aware of Charles Kingsley's novel about Hypatia.
Yes.
Right. So if it had been a film version of Charles Kingsley's Hypatia, I probably would have liked it very much. It's a Victorian romance, like Hypatia,
Oh, Lord.
She could have, she didn't make it, she got to the doorstep of the truth, but she couldn't enter in. Charles Kingsley was an anti-Catholic bigot, so there's a lot of anti-Catholicism in this novel. And lots of Victorian nonsense as well. I would have hated it.
That sounds about right.
I'll find out. I intend to read this novel I expect to hate, and come back with an informed opinion. about it, but like there are ways that the story of Hypatia could have been done that would have made me furious. Like there are reviews of this film that make me furious. Really say,
this is the kind of dedication to the cause that I appreciate.
Well, it's like I read a review of Agora that said, actually Christians were anti-intellectuals. Like consider Justin Martyr that thought that all of Platonism was really just Moses, and that makes me want to pull my hair out.
And that's the thing, is that this movie feeds into a narrative of the Western world that is pernicious and widespread, despite how thoroughly debunked it has been. And that narrative of the Western world is that, like, first of all, that the destruction of the Great Library of Alexandria, which again didn't happen, at least not the way depicted in this movie, it got burned down by Caesar, or by Caesar's troops at least, but was by Christians who hated knowledge that conflicted with their silly religion, and then they spent the next 1,000 years trying to suppress all the knowledge that conflicted with their dogmatic religious beliefs, which is not only not true, it's anti-true. Like, the Catholic Church did a tremendous amount to contribute to the knowledge of the world, including the knowledge of science. They had sorry, I'm getting, like, emotional here about this, but, like, they had dialogues, not, in person, but through their writings with Muslim philosophers of the day and with Greek philosophers of old, and they respected these people, and they used these people's knowledge, and it's contributing to the whole Dark Ages myth. And that scene that I love so much as a scene, I really do, where the ant Christians are running around sacking the Library of Alexandria, it's like, these are people who could never defend themselves, because these are just a bunch of nameless, faceless Christians who you've decided to make your bad guy playthings because you have an Edward Draper-style agenda against them.
Right. Two things there. First of all, I want to back you up there, is that the writings of antiquity come down to us, especially in Greek and Latin, because Christians have decided to preserve them. Or Muslims in the case of certain texts, including texts that
Christians and Muslims.
Texts that Hypatia worked on, we know about because they're only preserved in Arabic, like some of them. Mm-hmm. But in terms of like the sources of Hypatia's life, we have 5 sources, only one of which is by a pagan, Damascus, who I've already mentioned, who actually is critical of her. He says that his teacher Isidore, like, he is so far from Hypatia the way a man is so far from a woman, and that she was only a mathematician. She wasn't a real philosopher. But this text is known to us not in its original form. It's preserved by Photius, who was the patriarch of Constantinople in the 9th century. So we only know about this text because Photius has decided to copy out large excerpts of it. He wrote a famous book, which is actually, like, it's literally called Books I Read, where he summarizes the books that he read. many of which don't exist anymore.
His Goodreads account.
Yeah, his Goodreads account. We have this guy's Goodreads account. He preserves so much knowledge of antiquity just by writing down the stuff that he read, because things can be destroyed in random ways, not necessarily by concentrated mobs, although that certainly happens. Like when Caesar burned down the Library of Alexandria, that wasn't on purpose, right? That was a casualty. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if I could play devil's advocate a bit, like the Serapeum was torn down. There was a library inside it. The movie is playing a sleight of hand by trying to make you think that it's the Library of Alexandria.
It is, but also it wasn't torn down because the Christians hated knowledge.
Right. Right. They did hate paganism, and there was a lot of that in the age of Theodosian, including a notorious episode involving Theodosius and Ambrose, where some people in Syria had torn down a synagogue, and Theodosius ordered it rebuilt. Ambrose, the teacher of Augustine, he interposed himself, and he says, "Don't you dare do that. Don't rebuild the synagogue, the place of worship of these people who killed Christ." And that is something that pains me to read because, again, Ambrose is someone who I admire generally, but I don't really admire his approach there. The movie is trying to have it both ways by conflating Greek god-style paganism with Platonism, and those two things are not the same.
Nope. And really, the part that pisses me off is mostly just that it's a big contributor to the long debunked story of the Christians hated science and destroyed the big library because it was full of the science, and then spent the next 1,000 years trying to suppress all this, not even just the next 1,000 years, the next, up to the present, trying to suppress all the science that they could, because if the science got out, it might teach people that their god is fake or something, and
Right.
except on the level of individual idiots throughout history, none of it is true.
Right. So I guess the other way I think of it is that I can either have this film about Cyril of Alexandria, or I can have no films, because no one is making my musical about the Council of Ephesus anytime soon.
Well, given how important I know that is to you, I am glad then that you have this film.
And frankly,
and with that...
Okay. Frankly, it could have been much worse.
Like I said, if I'm being objective, which I can't be, I'm happy for you that this film exists. And with that, we should probably wrap it up, assuming anybody is still listening to us after all this.
Well, thank you for taking one for the team. I appreciate that you rewatch this movie you hate for me.
No, that's the spirit of the thing. I look forward to next time when you may or may not assign me a movie that I hate this much. In the meantime, thank you, as always, for listening, everybody out there who is listening. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you, Gavin, for assigning me this great movie to watch and discuss. And you can tune in next month to find out about more movies that are great and that we love. And in the meantime, you can go read Gavin's columns and my columns and Tim's columns and all the other great stuff that we have on the website. Sign up for the Patreon if you have not done so. And keep checking back on the podcast to see what we do next. Thanks, everybody. Bye.